Hello, this is a new video that I put together basically showing what type of armor was used in the Korean War. Basically, U.S. Army tanks that were used in the Korean War. This is kind of an interesting subject because the Korean War happened in 1950, 5 years after World War II. So you had a lot of old World War II equipment being recycled and fixed to be put back in the battle to battle each other out in Korea. The Korean War started basically on June 25th, 1950, and Korea was split at the 38th parallel between Soviet Union in the north and the U.S. in the south. This is after the fighting with Japan ended. Korea was part of Japan, and because of such, it was occupied by the Allies, basically U.S. and Soviet. Well, North Korea was led by Kim Il Sung, who was the grandfather of Kim Jong Un. He is the founder of the state of North Korea. He is a communist. He was in the Soviet Union during World War II. Some say he was born in the Soviet Union, but I didn't research that. My main thing here is to show the type of armor used and how, how, how things basically went. The North Koreans were supplied from Joseph Stalin and the Soviets with the T-34-85 tank. Basically, off the battlefields of Europe, fighting the Germans with the Panther and Tiger tanks. It's a good tank with an 85 millimeter gun, relatively quick, and used properly. It was really good in mass kind of battle kind of situations. They had quite a few of them that the Soviets gave them. So Kim Jong Kim Il Sung, wanted to reunify Korea under one leadership, which would be his. He did not want Syngman Rhee, who was a nationalist and anti-communist ruling South Korea, to have the upper hand. So, on June 25th, 1950, North Korea invaded with a horde of these tanks, coming in and chasing everybody away. The sad thing for the United States is we only had ground troops, maybe a handful of tanks, some anti-tank equipment, but not tanks to go and fight these tanks that were swarming in from the north. So the only good thing that we had was Japan. Being that we occupied Japan, we stored military equipment in Japan because it was like our headquarters for the Pacific after post World War II going into the Cold War. So all that they could bring to Korea initially to help stem the tide of the North Koreans were these M24 Chaffee tanks, World War II light tanks with a 75 millimeter gun. It's a good tank, a great recon and scouting tank, which it was during the Second World War, and that's what it was best for. And not made to be fighting other tanks, being that it's smaller than the T-34 and it does not have the armor to sustain direct hits. And this kind of a gun, this concentric recoiled 75 millimeter gun, so it could fit in a smaller tank, did not have the oomph or the ability to take out a T-34. Maybe behind a turret, maybe in a weak spot, but if engaged out in the open, these things were destroyed. And basically, when you're fighting with tanks, it's a tank that sees the other tank first that takes the opportune shot that wins the battle. Well, the lucky thing, like I said, in Japan, they were able to refurbish World War II tanks that were no longer being used in the battlefields of World War II, bring them up to standards to go and fight in Korea or wherever else they needed them. And they used the local Japanese population, which was very sophisticated in terms of manufacturing. So what they did was they got a lot of them involved in maintaining and upgrading these tanks that were coming back that they wanted to switch to the battlefields in Korea. I know the British had tanks in Korea, but like I said, the T-34s that came down outnumbered. So what you had coming from Japan next were these, and this was the game changer in the Korean War. The EZ-8 M4 Sherman tank with the 76 millimeter long gun, also famous for fighting on the battlefields of Europe against German Tiger and Panther tanks, Very similar to the T-34 with sloped armor. It didn't have a V12 diesel, it had a Ford V8 engine, and it could go with 30 miles an hour just like a T-34. Basically saying this tank, the M4 EZ8, was a match for the T-34. Could it hold up direct hits? Maybe in some parts in the front where the armor was sloped. But what this tank had, it had an American crew that a lot of them had experience in World War II, and they were trained in how to use these tanks. So, as far as on the battlefield fighting the T-34, you had a tank that could engage it and knock it out. That's how the tide started to turn. With these better trained American crews and these M4 Shermans that were refurbished in Japan and fixed up and brought back to battlefield standing instead of being put in the mothballs, out fighting. So these two tanks fought, and the tide started to turn because of the American crews. Well, not to be outdone, we also had available in Korea the M26, the Pershing, which didn't get a lot of battle time in World War II, but it would in this war. There were criticisms of this tank being kind of like underpowered. It had the similar engine, Ford V8 to the Sherman, but this is our first totally modern battle tank, I would say. It came in as a heavy tank, but in reality, all the tanks that were to come from this point on would be main battle tanks. The Centurion would be one. This one would, as would its evolution, the M46, the first patent tank. The difference between that tank and this tank, where the 90mm gun was a little bit different variant that was a little bit better, and in place of the Ford V8 engine, it had a Continental V12 turbocharged engine, so it had a lot more power, and it could go quicker and be a little bit more effective on the battlefield. When the M26 and the M46 came up against the T-34, it was lights out. The armor was thicker, the gun was better, and literally destroyed most of the T-34s and drove them back into North Korea, having them go all the way up almost into China until that point where the Chinese stepped in and pushed everybody back. But basically the thing that I wanted to make about this was the Korean War was like the last usage of World War II equipment, which led into newer and better things, which would be the M46. I know this is an M26, but don't have a model, but they are very similar. So for the purpose of me illustrating what I'm talking about, I'm going to say now this is the M46. So you have us coming out of the Korean War, making better and more capable tanks, which basically was an arms race between us and the Soviet Union up until the point the Soviet Union disintegrated. And what you have now are the leftover Soviet equipment in Ukraine, the Russians and the Ukrainians using them. And you have the United States with the M1 Abrams, the British with the Challenger, and the Germans with the Leopard tanks. So you have a lot of decent armor that can outdo most of the Soviet armor out there. But it all kind of started with the Korean War and basically the ending of hostilities there, and then going into a time of more development based upon battlefield experiences. So it was basically the heyday for this hero of World War II, the T-34-85, and basically the last hurrah for the M4 Sherman. Basically this version, the EZ8, because it had the horizontal volute suspension and the modern tank. It was basically a super Sherman, I could say. And this basically would go and become a National Guard tank until it was pulled from service in 1957. And it was given a lot of our allies to be used. But it did really good during the Korean War against the T-34-85. So much so that the battle complexity changed because of it. And tanks like the Shafi, light tanks are becoming less and less I don't know, popular or useful as far as modern military. This was a World War II tank and did well in World War II. They would send these to Vietnam. The French would use them in the jungle. They're kind of good for that, and they would still kind of do well with it. But this was replaced by the Walker Bulldog, the M41. The tank, though, that lives on and basically are the M26 and M46. After this, the M47 came out, which is a stopgap until the excellent M48 patent, and then eventually the M60. But they all kind of have their roots in the M26 and the M46, cutting their teeth in Korea. So basically, that's it. Our Army used three basic types of tanks that I just shown and did a good job of clamping down and stopping the North Koreans. Had there been Russian or Ukrainian Soviet soldiers in those tanks, it might have been another kind of a end of the story. But because it was what you saw there, that's the outcome that you had from the Korean War. Hopefully, I got some interesting stuff in here. I will have more plane and tank videos. I'm waiting on parts for a Corsair fighter plane. Unfortunately, it was missing parts, and I had to send a thing to Kobe to go and get them to get me the parts. And just, if you like to build Kobe stuff, they will give you them for free. I mean, if they mess up, you send them an email, boom, they respond. As soon as I get those, I'll build that and put those in the video. But the main reason for doing this was to get some of my other tanks out I haven't shown in a while, and kind of show you how they are in reality as far as like with battle. And basically, it was all a thing of, this is what we had, what's the best way to use it. We use these up, we go to the next one, which would be the Sherman. But basically, because our crews were so well trained, I mean, we did pretty good. So that's all for this video. The next one will probably be on a Corsair. I might have some pen and watch videos coming up in the future too. But I'm going to do more video content because I'm still not working. Who knows if it'll ever happen. Maybe after the election. But until then, I'll put up some more stuff and hopefully people like them and respond back, and I can make some better ones that have a little bit more, I don't know, beauty to them. I got to come up with a camera configuration, but for now, this is a lot better than using my phone. And I hope you enjoyed and have a good day. Great weekend too.